Okay, we're ready to begin. Go ahead, Oma.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Alma Kinton, and I'm the City of Toronto's Chief People Officer. So I have the pleasure of leading the city's People and Equity Division. So we lead the city's equity portfolio as well as the traditional human resource functions as well. I'm joined today by Mayor John Tory and also by Laura McGee, who's the CEO of Diversio, a great local organization that we've had the pleasure of partnering with over the last couple of years. We're here today to share some very exciting news about an important milestone in the City of Toronto's work towards equity, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace. First, I want to welcome Mayor John Tory.
Well, Omo, thank you very much. And may I just say that Omo is a person who would be less in front of the media than some others of her colleagues in the public service, but she does an outstanding job for us in terms of not just what we're talking about today, which is inclusion and diversity, but just in terms of the overall management in a respectful way of the relationship that we have between the public service and the City Hall, which is one that generally works very, very well and has been evidenced by the good job done by the public service during the pandemic. So I want to thank her for her leadership in that regard. And part of this, is about trying to make sure that we're accountable for and measured on our progress in this area. And we've had great help, and I'm very pleased to be joined as well today by Diversio CEO Laura McGee, who will talk in a few minutes. But we're making an announcement today that should give confidence to those working to make our City Hall, the City of Toronto Public Service itself, a model of diversity and inclusion, because we've got to set the example and we've got to be true to our own expressed values that we express for the entire city. Today, we're proud to announce that the City of Toronto has received Diversio certification. And we're part of the first cohort of organizations, I think there's about 80 of them, in fact, that are spanning a variety of sectors to receive this certification. And I'm proud to say as well that we are the first city to receive the certification. For those who don't know, this certification recognizes the city's continued commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace in ways that drive real change. This is a significant achievement that sets Toronto apart as a leader in the three key areas identified by Diversio. First, we have committed to measuring and setting targets to increase diversity at all levels of the organization. Second, we're committed to long-term data tracking of employee demographics and experiences. So we're not just doing a one-time measurement and then sort of calling it a day. We're committed to long-term measurement of these things. And third, we've developed a robust strategy to make improvements through concrete programs and policies. These are the commitments we had to make in order to get the certification. I think it's become increasingly important for the Toronto Public Service to reflect the communities we serve in Toronto, because we're suggesting that as part of being true to our own values, the rest of the city, the rest of the employers and other organizations, including the political realm, have to do that, but we have to set an example at City Hall itself. In line with the city motto, which is diversity is our strength, we know that along with being the most diverse city in the world, we have to make sure that we have a workforce that is directly employed by the city that is also diverse. This is good for the city itself, it's good for the residents of the city, and for the people, of course, who end up occupying those important positions. In 2019, the City Council adopted a multi-year strategy called the Workforce Equity and Inclusion Plan. This plan aims to improve diversity at all levels of the organization and build a more inclusive workplace culture. The plan also makes data-based decision-making a key priority for the city, and that is where Diversio came in. This is a company that I'm proud to say, and I first encountered them in the context of some of the startup businesses that had found their home in Toronto and made their home in Toronto, and how proud we were of all of those and tried to nurture those and encourage those and promote them, quite frankly, so that others here in Toronto and elsewhere would become customers and clients of theirs. And what Diversio does is it uses AI, artificial intelligence, and robust benchmarking to measure and to track and to provide actionable recommendations to help organizations, including the City of Toronto, to improve their diversity and inclusion efforts. So as part of the city's strategy, the city engaged Diversio to carry out a comprehensive analysis of employee demographics, identities, and experiences. And what this did was to shed light on many of the positive actions that we've undertaken as a city government to create a more inclusive workforce. And just to give you some examples of that, as of today, for example, based on self-declarations, the City of Toronto workforce includes 50% women, 39% from racialized backgrounds, and 6% who have differing abilities. And that's not to say we stop there and that represents any kind of a target that has been met. It simply provides a benchmark, but it also, I think, is a benchmark that people would see as being relative to many other places in the city and encouraging a benchmark that sort of shows you where we now start and follow through on some of the recommendations we've been given. It represents progress on representation of the community that our public service serves. And it is, then goes beyond that, though, because it's not just about top line numbers and progress. It's about the detailed analysis giving us recommendations as to how we can do even better. We're proud to be recognized for many of the city's existing initiatives that make us a global leader, as we should be, in championing diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And this includes initiatives we've undertaken, such as our action plan for confronting anti-Black racism unit. It was, at the time it was established, the first of its kind in North America, may still be. The Toronto for All Learning program and campaign, which has been recognized in a very broad way as being something that's bold and hopefully successful. The Human Rights Office and the Gender Equity Unit and the Equity Lens tool. The city also uses data from multiple employee demographic and experience surveys to support workplace and workforce development goals and to monitor progress. And it also helps us to identify ways in which we can improve the employee experience, in particular of Indigenous, Black, and equity deserving groups, to make sure that we're responsive to some of the concerns they identify to us in surveys we do ourselves, aside from the work we're doing with Diversio. So these are just some of the initiatives that show how the city is setting the standard for equity and diversity and inclusion in the public sector. We really want to make the city as a whole a city for all, but I think we've recognized that it has to start, and certainly one of the principal places people have the right to look to for an example is to the city hall. And the city hall is a place within a city, as a place where everyone can succeed and to thrive. And that in turn hopefully sets an example for other organizations, including businesses right across the city. It's something we have to talk about continuously. We have to strive towards it continuously, and that means doing things to lead by example. We know that notwithstanding this certification, it really is just a starting point for much more work to be done. And we remain committed to following through and bringing the recommendations to life. Among the recommendations, some of them remain confidential because they relate to personnel related matters, but some examples we can share with you that came out of the diversity work include creating a learning plan for leadership that is included in their performance planners around creating an inclusive environment, so that we make sure we train the leaders in the organization to understand how important this is as a value of City Hall and as something that they're responsible as leaders for doing and will be measured as such. Ensuring that a regular agenda item in leadership meetings concerns practices as they relate to inclusion, and ensuring that human rights, accessibility, and equity training is part of the all new supervisory and management staff onboarding. So from the first day people walk in to be employed here, if it's the first time they have been employed here, they understand this is part of our core foundational values at City Hall for our public service. So as we strive to make the city more inclusive for all Torontonians, the Diversio certification, I think, is confirmation that we are moving in the right direction, that we have a solid foundation to continue to work on going forward, which I will tell you as mayor, I am committed to seeing us do. And I know that Chris Murray, our city manager, feels the same way. And of course, Oma, who is his, senior most person in making all that happen. And I think that will help us build trust, yes, from our employees, but more broadly, it'll help us to build trust from all of the residents of the city and inspire confidence in residents and in businesses in the city that the city itself is developing strategies to meet these goals, but also that they can do the same thing. If we can do it, there's no reason that they can't do it out across the city in a broader context. So I want to say thank you to all of our city staff who continue to work on this, not just with Diversio, but generally, and it's been a foundational value of the city for some time. I want to say thank you to Alma in particular for her leadership in striving for this standard every single day. And I can just assure you in all the discussions we have about the myriad of matters that come onto her plate and that get discussed with me and with other senior people around City Hall, that it is something that's at the very top of her agenda. I'm very proud to work in a city that has been a leader when it comes to creating an inclusive workforce in city. And I know that the work we've done is just the beginning and there's much more to be done. But it's the right thing to do, and we're on the right track. And I think it is beginning to build confidence in all the people who have the right to expect that that's the kind of city they'll live in and work in. So on that note, I want to say thank you as well to Laura McGee and to Diversio for helping us to achieve this standard and for the work they will undoubtedly help us to do going forward to actually commit ourselves and implement the recommendations, and ask her if she will say a few words.
Thank you, Mayor Tory, and thank you, Omo, for all of your hard work. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with you all. And as a Torontonian by background, very pleased to see the city really take a leadership role and commit to not only reflecting the community that it serves, but also, of course, creating a culture that allows all employees to succeed and thrive in their working environment. So really kudos to you. Thought it might be helpful to say a word on Diversio certification. So we're extremely pleased to announce our inaugural cohort today. Of course, the City of Toronto is first among them. I think really quickly, you know, diversity and inclusion, of course, is a top priority. I think it's worth acknowledging that we all feel that this time is different. So why now? Why is the time right for a certification program? Really, the killing of George Floyd last year, and I think the Me Too movement prior to that, has sparked a new awareness and a wave of activism for social and economic inclusion. And again, Canadians, like many of us around the world, are demanding that companies and governments do more to guarantee that no person is excluded from opportunity and advancement by virtue of their race or their ethnicity or their gender or their ability, their Indigenous status, their sexual orientation, or really any other immutable characteristic. And so the moral case and the social movement, and I think the energy in the city and in Canada and around the world, I think we're all feeling that. And it really, you know, for many of us, this is a moment in time to capture that opportunity and create a more inclusive world. And I think for those, you know, companies that maybe need convincing, the business case, of course, is well established, but maybe a few stats for the upside to really making this commitment, tracking it with data, driving continued progress. I think we're seeing as one example, about 60% of Gen Z employees are saying that inclusion is a top priority for the company that they work for. So really companies that are facing any sort of talent shortage, this needs to be something that is front and center and really manifested in the workplace. Second thing, we're seeing, you know, a significant downside to companies that don't get it right and undergo some sort of scandal. And we're seeing that social media and Twitter in particular are emerging as platforms where employees can hold their company's feet to the fire. And we're seeing that the public is not accepting you know, toxic workplaces and in situations of harassment. So what we've seen is about a 3.1% drop in market cap for organizations that undergo that kind of scandal. Finally, I think really motivated by the Black Lives Matter movement, we're seeing over 70% of consumers will stop purchasing from a company that does not share their views on racial equality, gender equality, and social justice in particular. And what I think is quite interesting is about 76% of people will do diligence. And so if a company comes out and or a city or an organization comes out and says, this is a priority for us, we've made a pledge, we've made a commitment, you know, people around the world are really holding companies' feet to the fire, and they're going on Glassdoor, they're going on websites, they're looking at photos of executive teams and really calling out those that aren't authentic. And so I think we're all feeling, look, the moment is now. Ultimately, consumers, employees, citizens of cities like Toronto are really calling on organizations, companies, public sector organizations as well, to take the lead and use data, use targets, be transparent, make a commitment, and ultimately ensure that, I think we all believe this is not a one and done, but ensure that they are making that continued progress to create a world where everybody has equal opportunity. And ultimately, I'm sure as you all have seen, you know, create a more vibrant community where really more people want to go and more people enjoy the diversity of perspectives and thought that comes with having a more inclusive workplace. So when it comes to the certification in particular, it is quite a simple process in theory, but of course, it's all in the execution, like many things in life. But how it works is it starts with a comprehensive assessment of employee demographics, identities, and experiences, with a heavy emphasis on inclusion and on culture. So this is not simply about you know, how many people of color are on your management team or how many people have you recruited into your entry level. It is also equally about, you know, how are those people treated and engaged with when they make their way into the organization. We then, as you mentioned, we mine this data using artificial intelligence. And so ultimately being able to quantify employee experience and link that back to recommendations is really where we think the sweet spot is when it comes to progress. And then ultimately we work with organizations to develop actions and a strategy and a plan going forward using our global database. And so ultimately, I think as you've said, what certification means is that, the organization has not merely made a pledge. They have made an authentic commitment that is backed by data, that is backed by transparency and a long-term plan to create an environment that is highly inclusive, best in class, and ultimately, to your point, reflects the community that it operates in. So I might pause there and back over to you, Amo and Meritori.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks, Mayor Tory. As the mayor said, it is a pleasure to have, and truly an honor for us to have our equity and inclusion initiatives recognized by Diversio in this way. And truly, it has been a pleasure working with the Diversio team over the last couple of years. And thanks, Laura, for your comments, really highlighting why it's important for every organization to take this work seriously. We are one employer in Toronto. In order for us to create a Toronto for all, we actually need every employer in Toronto to really take on the task of working hard at equity and inclusion. Before we take your questions, I want to take this opportunity to thank my team. I appreciate the mayor's words of thanks to me, and my team is also an unsung team, and so I'd like to take every opportunity I can to thank them for the phenomenal work that they are doing, leading the city in this work, and a number of these programs that they have developed and are implementing, but also beyond that, the push that we're making to take a look at every single thing that we do to apply an equity and inclusion lens to ensure that we don't have any unintended barriers built into our processes. That's hard work. And we're doing all of that work in the middle of a pandemic when everyone is stressed. So I want to thank my team for their excellent work, and also for City of Toronto staff, because when our city manager started in 2019, he did a survey of city staff to identify our workplace culture theme. And one of the themes that was identified by our staff population was diversity and inclusion. So this is not just a council priority. This is not just a leadership priority. Our city staff themselves identify this as a priority for them. And I often speak at our new employee orientation. I always say to new employees who are starting monthly, I say to them, this is a pact that we have made as an organization, that this is a value of ours. So as you come into the organization, you're buying into this pact, and you're committing to living this out while you're here, and to making suggestions for how we can do better on this journey. So I want to thank all City of Toronto staff for their commitments as well to this work. So on that note, thank you, everyone, and we're happy to take questions.
Thank you to all of our speakers. We will now open it up to media questions. As a reminder, it's one question, one follow-up, and please unmute yourself when after we call your name. First up is Jennifer Pagliaro. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mayor Tory. I just had some questions related to the ongoing pandemic. I wanted to ask about the workplaces that Toronto Public Health announced they were closing yesterday. When you look at the list, not all of those seem to be producing essential items. For example, there's a skincare brand that we've seen in the news previously for issues with outbreaks. I just wonder if you believe the province should be closing non-essential workplaces, just given the additional work Toronto Public Health has had to do here to keep people safe. I think
Sorry,
you
muted.
Just need to unmute yourself.
No, I did. Yes. Sorry, I'll start again. I think what they should be doing, and I believe they are doing this, I have reason to believe they are doing this, is continuously reviewing the list. It is sometimes more complicated than just to name an industry or a given function at a plant that is in a given place in the city that might have had a problem or not, and say, well, it's essential or non-essential. I think you have to look at it in a context. But my understanding is that they're continuously looking at these lists because if you go back to the time, say, last spring, when I would arguably suggest that there were more places closed than maybe is the case today. there were some businesses that were declared non-essential at that time. It's one of those things where it's not a simple matter, but I think the answer is yes, they should be continuously reviewing that list. I understand they are doing that. I have no idea if that's going to lead to to changes that they might make in that list, but I'm sure that, just as I was talking to Dr. DeVille this morning about the fact we get informed by what we see when these test results are filed, and she and her team have to look at places of employment and decide what to do about them, whether it's closure, partial closure, or some other measures. I'm sure the province is learning from that information too, as to where the virus is spreading and where we're seeing these cases crop up.
And on a separate topic, one of your deputy mayors, Councillor Holiday, has sent a letter to the Premier asking them to review opening both golf courses and tennis courts, saying that the risk for all sports is not the same, and people could do those outdoor activities safely. I know the city has been posting signs about amenities being closed under provincial order, but I wonder if you have any support for what Councillor Holiday is asking about here.
Well, we post the signs because there is a provincial order that says those facilities should be closed. And I have said, though, for several days now, more than a week probably, that I'm very open as mayor of Toronto to sitting with our public health authorities and reconsidering that list. And so if it's the case that the scientists and the medical people, including our own, advise us that golf and tennis, to pick the two examples that you asked about, can be played safely within the context of the current health circumstances, then I'm very open to a reconsideration by the province and would be supportive of their reconsidering that. And so, again, it's a discussion that they have to have with themselves as well as with us, and decide if that's a direction in which they want to go. But I would certainly be open to that discussion entirely, based on the advice that we've received from our own health people, and that some of their own scientists have talked about as well.
Thanks, Jennifer. And next up, we have Matt Bingley from Global. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Apologies to your panelists, Mayor, but my questions are also on the pandemic. I'm just wondering, according to reporting from the Globe this morning, it appears that on the sick pay front, the ball is still sort of being bounced back and forth between the federal and provincial government over how to address that. I'm just wondering, at this point of the pandemic, and especially of the third wave, how concerning is it for you to see the two governments still sort of squabbling over what the best way of doing this is?
Well, on the one hand, there's a real big need to get this right. And get this right to me means a simple thing for the employees and employers involved, because there's no need setting up, complicated systems that involve multiple applications by people. Secondly, there's a need to make sure that the money reaches people on a timely basis and not weeks later when they've already had to pay for food the day after they got sick or thought they were sick. And thirdly, of course, is the quantum of the money involved, that it's adequate to allow people to provide for their families during a time when they're sick. And so I just think it's time to get on with this. I said that, in fact, weeks ago. It's past time, and I hope that, and I think the provincial government is seized with a sense of urgency about this. And I hope if they're exploring something with the federal government that is not going to work out, that rather than have it go on with more weeks of intense debate and discussion and whatnot, that they will just do something on their own to make this happen. But the bottom line is, it has to happen. It will happen. The Premier said it's going to happen, and I'm optimistic that they're working very hard to make it happen.
And just to follow up on the news that childcare workers are now eligible to be vaccinated, I'm just wondering, do you know if how many city employees of childcare centers have been actually vaccinated, if they were given leeway before, or if they're now fresh into this? And are you surprised? I know a lot of parents are probably waking up to the news about this and wondering why their caregivers for their children weren't vaccinated earlier.
One of the most difficult parts of being involved in this whole vaccination process, with many of the rules about prioritization being set by the province, has been that there are various groups that seem logical and almost, it seems illogical that they wouldn't have been vaccinated by now. But of course, there are so many groups, and there's been such a limitation on supply that it was difficult to get all those groups done, that people would just say, well, of course they got done a long time ago. So now the childcare workers, as a defined category, will be eligible to be vaccinated, as a group starting on Thursday. I don't know the numbers of exactly how many within our own public service and otherwise have been vaccinated at this moment, but I'm sure public health can provide that. I think the bottom line is this: it has been an extremely difficult series of decisions for the province to make and for us to carry through on in the absence of a robust supply. And so I just hope that the increased supply that is anticipated starting sort of around the end of this week and into weeks to follow will allow us to cover a lot of these groups which are exposed to the public and are doing essential jobs for us and have been wondering themselves why they haven't been vaccinated so far. And it's been strictly a matter of the priority that the science has told us to set in doing hotspots, which we have been doing, and that covers a lot of these essential workers. But of course, the even better way to cover them in addition is to do them as groups and have them be eligible, as they now will be, for inclusion on, say, the registration system for the city clinics.
Okay, that was the last question. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks. Thank you, Laura. And
you.
don't be discouraged, Laura. They will they'll write up the story as well. Just even though the questions often come on different topics.
I'm not surprised at all.
It's the way it works. They ask whatever it's on their mind this morning. So, and thank you for all your hard work, and you too and your team, Almo, very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, mate.